anti-racism. This will be the final one of this particular year, and it's really appropriate that we end with a phenomenal speaker today. Our guest is Dr. Howard Liu. Howard Liu is a physician and an MBA who's a nationally recognized psychiatrist, educator, workforce expert, social media innovator, equity advocate, and healthcare leader at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. He serves as the chair of the UNMC Department of Psychiatry, a professor with tenure in the UNMC College of Medicine, and as the president of the Association of Directors of Medical Student Education in Psychiatry. Previous roles include state workforce director, psychiatry clerkship director, and assistant vice chancellor for faculty development. He graduated from Northwestern University, magna cum laude, and completed his medical school and adult psychiatry resident at the University of Michigan. Yay, Michigan. And graduated with a child and adolescent psychiatry fellowship from the Massachusetts General Hospital, McLean Hospital. He completed his executive MBA in healthcare administration at the University of Colorado, Denver Business School. Howard is an innovative teacher and an expert in social media, medical education, and professional development. Now, I could go on and on about Dr. Liu, but I have been just really in awe of him since we've had a chance to get to know each other. My colleague and friend, Dr. Preston Wiles, did the honors of introducing us. His topic today will be illusion or inclusion, supporting the Asian American and Pacific Islander community in academic health centers. Dr. Liu, please welcome. Please feel free to open your conversation, and we look forward to hearing your esteemed words.
Well, such a generous introduction. Thanks so much, Dr. Nesbitt. And I got to tell you that I see UT Southwestern as a national leader in healthcare equity work. And in fact, in my role as president of the Association of Directors of Medical Student Education and Psychiatry, we are inviting Dr. Quinn Capers as our keynoter next year in Austin. So really see this as a symbiotic relationship. I really appreciate your own leadership in this space. So impressive what you've done. And I'll reference it later in my talk in terms of integration of the curriculum into the community. And I am a great admirer of Dr. Preston Wiles' work as well in student health, student services. And so really appreciate this opportunity. I did mention social media a little bit earlier. And if you are active on social media, my preferred platform is on Twitter. You can follow me here, Dr. Howard Liu. And if you feel like you're so moved, you can tweet today during the session. I recommend the following 3 hashtags: Stop AAPI Hate, hashtag Stop Asian Hate, and then this month's hashtag AAPI Heritage Month as well. So again, just such an honor to come here and join this innovative anti-racism series. It really is a best practice across all academic health centers. And I love that you are featuring Asian American community today. So really appreciate this opportunity. Just some financial disclosures, various pieces that I do. I'm the chair, as I mentioned earlier, of my department, and then president of a national teaching organization, and then receive a little bit of editorial fees from Elsevier for editing a journal. Actually, this year is going to be on workforce and diversity, and then do some talks, and then do some work for the Clinical Scholars Program for Robert Wood Johnson on the selection committee. I just want to add some personal disclosures that for all of us that work in this space, I think it's best to approach with a sense of humility. And, I'm learning just alongside every one of you. I don't claim to speak for all Asians or for the entire BIPOC community, but just as a very interested member. And really, I welcome your feedback. And if there's any ways that I can learn and improve, or ways that we can enhance the discussion, I'd love to hear from you as well. You can either tweet it at me or direct message me or email me, either way. If I unintentionally trigger you with any of my words or images today, I apologize. It's not my intent. I do know that you have an excellent employee assistance program and student counseling program if you do need support. And I also just want to add that I stand in solidarity with other diversity, equity, and inclusion and anti-racism work in every community, including UT Southwestern. And I truly believe that elevating one community elevates all of us as we work together. So the 2 learning objectives by the end of this talk, I hope that you will recognize the role of senior leaders in creating infrastructure for the AAPI students, faculty, and staff. And then think about 2 resources here that you have that really can be a source of learning, inspiration, and maybe future directions for building the culture. So we'll progress in 4 parts today and definitely have some time for some discussion at the end. So the first part is just a discussion about my awakening. There's this great documentary that I saw a few years ago about new farmers, and I live in Nebraska, so it's relevant to my work, but farming is a difficult job if you grew up in an urban setting. And so this documentary follows these 4 new farmers. And one thing they said stuck with me all these years: if you've never been in over your head, how do you know how tall you are? Right? So the idea is that we're always growing. And by taking on new challenges, that's really where you learn and to grow, even if you stumble at times. So in my 90s to 2000, I grew up in Iowa. And so fairly close to Nebraska, Midwestern place. And at the time, not particularly diverse in terms of the AAPI community. And yet those that were there were known, and we were often connected in small family units. Growing up, not very many folks in my high school identified as part of the Asian American community. And it really wasn't until I went to college at Northwestern in Chicago that I started to learn more about it. I ended up double majoring in history and biology and took some Asian American history classes. And I remember one particular project, just looking at US history textbooks for high school and looking at how much was taught about Executive Order 9066, which was the internment of Japanese Americans in concentration camps during the war. And you could see decade by decade how there was nothing, and then a little bit, and then more. To the point where recently I took one of my 4 kids to the World War II National Museum in New Orleans, and there's a whole section on it, and really was quite impressed by the curation. Going on to med school, I did not plan to be particularly active in this space. I thought I'd focus on learning. And of course, life happens, and then sometimes you're in over your head. So the next phase in my M1 year, that's when 9/11 attacks happened. And of course, we all remember where we were at that moment. I was in lab, and suddenly we were all adrift and trying to figure out, where the world was and where we were going as a nation. So I know that, for a lot of us, we kind of wandered around the canceled classes, and we tried to figure out locally, what did this mean to the Michigan community? So I think for most of the country, life eventually recovered. But for those that were associated with the attacks, particularly Muslim Americans, it resulted in a spike in assaults and hate crimes. And there's a particularly large population of Arab Americans and Muslim Americans in Dearborn, Michigan, and other parts of Michigan. And so we saw this and heard about some of these attacks that were happening, also impacting Sikh Americans, SIKH, who were also targeted. And it was deeply troubling to me and to my classmates. And we were trying to figure out, well, what should we do about it? So at the time, I then was elected president of the state's chapter of the Asian Pacific American Medical Students Association. And we decided that we would try to put together some sort of a program. And so we reached out to our law student compatriots and also the public health groups, and then also on the undergraduate campus to just figure out, well, what can we do together? Is there strength if we come together to put on something that would impact the whole campus? And so we created a Hate Crime Symposium vision that we would put together a week-long summit on events that were happening and feature really stories from every community. And so we work with the Multi-Ethnic Student Association and then different groups in each of the professional schools in Ann Arbor, and really came together. And in between classes, we would work on this, and we finally were able to pull it off. And we ended up raising about $10,000 to bring in a keynote speaker and do some other events. So it really was for us a bit of an awakening. We also did some local research and discovered that in Detroit in 1982, 20 years earlier, there had been the killing of a Chinese American named Vincent Chin, which actually touched off a lot of the modern Asian American awareness movement. So he was beaten to death by two auto workers who were never really put in prison. They were just fined $3,000 for the killing. And so that was an awakening for the community back then. And so we decided that we would commemorate the 20-year anniversary of Vincent Chin's death and also raise awareness about the current wave of hate crimes. So we did that, and we showed some documentaries. We had a candlelight vigil, and we brought in Helen Zia, who was a journalist in the Bay Area, who wrote a book called Asian American Dreams, really talking about the awareness movement and the AAPI community. And I think it was powerful for those who were attending. But as I'll reference a little bit earlier, the real focus at that time was about awareness. And I think that there were some other opportunities that we might have missed 20 years ago. So now I'm going to talk just a little bit about definitions. And I like this quote from poet Jose Saramago. Inside us, there's something that has no name. That something is what we are. And the difficulty right now is there's a lot of words out there. What do they mean? And which one is the right word? So you'll see in this talk, I use a blend of different terms. AAPI means Asian American Pacific Islander, which is distinguished from Asian American, which is distinguished from Pacific Islander, which is sometimes called Pasifika as a community. And I read a recent article from the Seattle Times, which really looked at how the AAPI term really lumps rather than distinguishes between communities. And it may particularly underserve the Pacific Islander groups, who are often quite underrepresented in healthcare and in other fields, and really face many health disparities. And so this article was about really separating the two, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, also Native Hawaiians, to really make sure that we are celebrating some of the richness of each culture. So that's something just to ponder going ahead. I'm sure many of you have heard the term the model minority myth. And that is that, basically all Asians are successful. And typically there's other echoes like, being good at math or engineering or those kind of things, and really not needing any help. And the challenge is, again, that this cloaks the different disparities within the communities and can really be a dangerous misnomer. So I would say that this concept belongs in all discussions as we think about anti-racism and stereotypes and implicit bias. And it really is an active issue today. In healthcare, I found this AAMC report from 2016, just looking at splitting out, for example, the Southeast Asian community. And so this might be Vietnamese or Laotian or Cambodian Americans. And it turns out that they are actually quite underrepresented, and in some ways, way more underrepresented than, say, South Asians or Chinese Americans in the traditional Asian American groups. And so one thing just to think about, going ahead is whether in your own measures, as you gather your own metrics, whether you might want to separate and disaggregate some of that data on Southeast Asians and Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians and see, in fact, if they are also equally represented in your institution. Just another reminder is there's been a lot of pieces out in the media about xenophobia, which is just a little bit different than racism, right? You can have both, but xenophobia really is the fear of strangers or foreigners, or of anything that's strange or foreign. And of course, that has risen, especially when there's been a conflation of Chinese Americans in particular with the COVID-19 virus. And so I think that's been some believe to be part of the rise of the violence and hate crimes against Asian Americans. And of course, racism itself is just a belief that racial differences produce the inherent superiority of a particular race. And that could be turned against any race or ethnicity in the future. So sometimes both of those are in place, sometimes it's just one. So we just have to keep those things in mind. I also looked up in the state of Texas what qualifies as a hate crime. And it turns out that it's a crime. And then they have to prove that, or at least beyond the shadow of a doubt, that they intentionally selected you because of bias or prejudice against your race, color, disability, religion, national origin, ancestry, age, gender, sexual preference, etc. And so that can either be a crime or it can be, without a criminal action, can be a bias incident. So I think as we're looking at things, and then part of it is being vigilant for our neighbors, just it's helpful sometimes to know what that means and why maybe an incident which seems to you like it would be a hate crime is not prosecuted that way by law enforcement. So part 3, I want to talk a little bit about the current wave of anti-Asian hate crimes in 2020. And, I put this quote up here by Martin Luther King Jr. "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." And honestly, I now am a father of 4 kids, and I'm married to a physician who's also Asian American. And I kind of thought in the back of my mind when I was a student that, things would just keep getting better, right? That 20 years from now, we just make steady progress. And, this whole thing about this extraordinary event that happened with 9/11 was just, a blip in history, and that we won't have to face this again. But unfortunately, it's just not been the case. And in fact, the pendulum has swung back. And I might have known because 20 years earlier was the killing of Vincent Chin in '82, which also touched off another wave. At that time, the anger was about auto imports and how that's impacting the domestic automotive industry. And so really, the concept as I saw this latest hate crime wave erupt was perhaps we can't just be back on our heels, just assuming that progress will take care of itself. Perhaps we have to be vigilant and proactive for the sake of our kids. So, and there's been a number of different reports about hate crimes. Recently, the New York Times investigated and corroborated about 110 different episodes from March 2020 that had clear evidence of a race-based hate motive, which, you saw the earlier definition from Texas. So they had to prove that not only did this person punch this person, but they did so with a racially motivated intent, right? And that was provable by the context of what happened and by legal definitions. And so you'll see that in the Times reports, all the links, by the way, I'm going to reference are just below. And I've shared the PDF with Dr. Nesbitt, Dr. Wiles, and the team. So if you want to access that later, you can, I'm sure. But there's a mix, sometimes it's vandalism, and we've seen that in every state where you see graffiti spray painted on, it might be a Chinese-owned business or an Asian American different eatery or something like that. It might be a verbal attack, something that was said on public transportation, in the hallway, in the grocery store, or it might be even more egregious, like a physical attack. And unfortunately, those have also been rising. And you see that, at least in the Times version, it's not like it's getting better and kind of dying down. There's been a steady crescendo, actually since January as well, in the physical attacks. There's another organization that's often quoted in the media, which is Stop AAPI Hate, which is started in California, really just to catalog different hate crimes that were occurring. And the last report was released in March, and really almost 3,800 different hate crimes reported, ranging from verbal harassment, as I mentioned earlier, to physical assaults. And sometimes online harassment as well. Everyone does believe, like all forms of harassment, that these numbers severely undercount what's actually happening. And I would say that there is some belief amongst Asian American leaders that particularly it might be so for our community, because typically there's a bit of an attitude of, try to keep your head down and don't create trouble, just kind of move on. But in fact, we need the exact opposite if we're going to prosecute and really be aware of this wave of hate crimes. So I also did a little bit of research on this and how this impacted your state. And it turns out that Texas ranks 4th in the nation in anti-Asian incidents. And in fact, 1/5 of all the assaults occurred in Texas against Asian Americans. So it's not something that's just happening in another state, and I would say Nebraska definitely has a long way to go as well, where I live. But there is actually things that are occurring in Texas. And there's another center that's located in California that tracks some of the hate crimes a little bit even more specifically, and they tracked 6 anti-Asian hate crimes in Dallas in 2020. And I saw that some of your local elected representatives have rallied to really raise awareness about it. So this was a different article about Representative Eddie Bernice Johnson of Dallas, really speaking up about it at a rally here. So it's good to see that your community is coming together to speak up against it. I also saw that your mayor, Eric Johnson, proclaimed March 26th as Stop Asian Hate Day in Dallas, and really made a powerful statement that hate has no place in our city or our country, and really a timely announcement. And really I would say that the tipping point for many elected officials was the shootings in Atlanta, which killed a number of Asian American women that were working in the massage industry. And so that really seemed to be the one in a lot of different academic health centers and elected officials spoke up, even though these crimes have been occurring on a smoldering basis for the past year. And actually, one of the criticisms from members of the AAPI community was that they really couldn't get much press around it. So actually, they started on social media to raise awareness, and it kind of blew up from there. So, even though there's been a lot of negativity in the reports, I do want to point out that there are some silver linings that have come out of this discussion in a number of different areas. And this is just a small smattering of them, actually. So, for example, in Illinois, the House just passed a bill mandating Asian American history be taught in schools, in K-12 schools. And it needs to pass their Senate, but it could be the first state where there's mandated discussion about things like Executive Order 9066 or the Chinese Exclusion Act or other events which really are frankly undertaught. And as a former history major in college, I realized just how much we skipped over when I looked back at my high school U.S. history courses. And the idea is, well, can we make sure that that doesn't happen to the next generation, particularly as it seems that there's been a wave of violence, which maybe is based a little bit on misunderstandings of the community as well. At the federal level, the Senate has passed an anti-Asian hate crime bill as well. I think it was 94-1. And really this measure was to beef up the ability to prosecute from the Justice Department and police departments and so on against hate crimes. So it seems that that really was a bipartisan effort and really brought together both sides of the aisle to talk about some of the challenges. And really they wanted to see some real concessions made on both sides, but they were to get it done. Initially, it required, it was a bit lukewarm, as I understand it in the beginning, but they reported that once Susan Collins from Maine started to reach out to the bill's main sponsor, they were able to broker a deal. So that really was, I would say, a ray of light of what's come out of all this as well. So, advocacy takes money and it takes organizations, especially if we're going to move beyond awareness to systems change. And so the corporate community has started to come together, and this is just recent as of yesterday, that it seems that there's a new group of Asian American business leaders and allied corporations that are giving towards a common fund to help on both on the education side, the advocacy side, and really to try to fight back against hate crimes. And the report is that they've started with $250 million. So it does seem like there is some movement there. I see as a positive sign, and surely in your community in Dallas, there are probably a number of corporations that are doing outstanding work in the diversity, equity, inclusion community, and this could be another area where perhaps they might partner. Last area that I saw as a bright light, I am a child psychiatrist, and one of my kids is still preschooler. But really it's just thinking about starting early. So I mentioned that I didn't learn about Vincent Chin's killing until I was in med school, sad to say. Should it be taught earlier? In fact, now there's a children's book about it that's just coming out this year. And this Times article just illustrates just some young adults and teen and even early childhood books that we can think about to talk about some of the challenging items, like the Executive Order 9066 in Japanese internment, and just some of the challenges of growing up as a Asian American person or as a multiracial person or whatever it might be. So it's an interesting dialogue, and I would just say that my experience is that these conversations are always difficult, especially if we kind of steel ourselves up to talk about it once. It's sort of like talking to your teenager about sexual health. But as a child psychiatrist, my belief is that you should probably talk about these things more than once, and then people have different career phases, different levels of maturity by each child. So as we're talking about, inclusion, talking about racism, my thought is to start the conversation early, and then make sure that hopefully there's some advocacy at the schools so that there's some unit there as well. When all this was happening, I did ask my 4 kids if their teachers ever talked about the wave of anti-Asian hate crimes, and none of them said yes. Unfortunately, at least in our public schools, it has not yet been reflected in any unit. So the last part of my talk I want to discuss is what academic health centers can do. And I do want to say again that, I see UT Southwestern as a national leader in equity, and you have outstanding nationally known leaders in this space. We had the pleasure of hosting the ACGME CEO, which, if you're not in medicine, he is the head of the accrediting body for graduate medical education, or residency and fellowship programs. And he said something which stuck with me several years later, which is that we must demonstrate professionalism in action. That is what shapes learners, not our words. And talking to so many colleagues of color this year, LGBTQ colleagues this year, I think everyone appreciates words of support, but I think even more so, we appreciate action. It's particularly systemic action, where we're going to take on the institution and change the culture to make it a little bit more inclusive, knowing that oftentimes these changes don't happen overnight and require a lot of uphill effort, but still the timing needs to occur now. So I thought that was an interesting frame from Dr. Nasca. As Dr. Nesbitt mentioned in that very generous introduction, I've had the pleasure of working in a few different leadership roles now, where I've tried, failed, and sometimes succeeded in change initiatives in each phase. And I've learned a few things since, the 2002 Hate Crime Symposium I put on as a medical student with my colleagues. And, I hope to channel that in this next section, just to talk to particularly our student leaders, who I hope are in the audience, but as you are thinking about, well, what can I do? I'm early in my career, where I'm still busy with this exam and that exam and so on. I'm under a lot of stress. What can I do? And my thought is, I just had a meeting with one of our local student leaders earlier today. It's not all on your shoulders, but here's just some thoughts, as I've been reflecting on the last 20 years. So, there's a path for all change initiatives, and they're not all the same. But I was trying to distill, what do I actually do? And, I've done a few different things this last year in different spaces, opened a new psychiatric emergency services. Part of my old role was to increase state licensed workforce. We increased that by 15% of licensed behavioral health, workers in the state of Nebraska, various pieces, and although the content may change, I think the process that I've learned is roughly the same, and it moves along these different steps. And I'd love to dialogue with you as we go through each one. So one of my favorite books for my MBA program was this book by Ed Catmull, who's one of the co-founders of Pixar, which is now Disney Pixar, called Creativity, Inc. And there's a number of different quotes, but one of my favorites is that if there's more truth in the hallways than in meetings, you have a problem. you being the leader of whatever unit or team that is. And I have found that to be true. And I know particularly now, as many of us are distanced or working distantly or sometimes from home, that the hallway is much more quiet than it used to be. So we, in fact, are losing a lot of those signals that we would have had before. And so we have to be especially proactive to listen to our colleagues. So I saw you had on your campus an outstanding webinar on March 30th about the Asian community. And I saw this demographic slide. And I had previously asked, before I saw this slide, Dr. Wiles and Dr. Nesbitt, what is your data on percentage of AAPI staff and faculty? And as you look at this graph, the gray bar is UT Southwestern, is your percentage. And it looks like this kind of tan bar or light orange bar is the national benchmark. Although, as we now know, underrepresented in medicine sometimes is about the local population versus looking at some national benchmark. But still, as you can see here, the gray bar of Asian Americans is pretty high in every one of these areas. I'll tell you, it's probably like double at least the number I have at my medical center at University of Nebraska. So just by the numbers, you really have a wealth of individuals that could help you envision what the future could look like as you're thinking about the needs assessment. And, were I to spend time talking to each group, I imagine that some different ideas would emerge from some, but maybe some commonalities as well. Talking to the house staff, the faculty, the staff as well, the postdocs who are in a research situation, the medical students who make up almost, it looks like more than 2 out of 5 of your medical students are Asian Americans. So really, you've got an amazing wealth of experts here on campus. And hopefully you get a chance to hear from them in some of the discussion today as well. Barring that, in case you don't get a chance to sit down with all of them, I know it's hard to gather everyone together. I am a believer that Twitter and other online platforms are oftentimes where you hear about things the first, right? It may not be published yet, but you'll hear about the chatter or someone might have newly published an article or presented a talk and you hear about it online, which is how, I met Dr. Wiles and really was invited today, and then Dr. Nesbitt. And so, I mentioned you can tweet out this talk if you feel so moved, but I also think that you can learn if you just type in these hashtags and just see what people are talking about. And that's where I learned a tremendous amount about equity in general. I've been working on gender equity initiatives for a few years with colleagues around the country. All of my learning really came from social media and then secondarily from local leaders as well. So, I've learned the same during this diversity, equity, inclusion renaissance over the last year and a half. Been a difficult time, but I would say it's moved us forward in a way that I haven't seen, at least in my career, the last 20 years. So, and I would say the same, if you're interested in some of the topics brought up today, hear about them in real time and then listen, and feel free to contribute to the conversation as well. Again, I bet many of you have a lot of insight. So here's an idea as well, and I put the link below. Sorry, it's kind of long, but it's a JAMA article that maybe you could do in your journal club among your residents. So say you're a program director, an associate program director, or just a faculty member that has somebody on their clinical rotation with you, and you've heard this talk and you say, well, what is this really like? Well, one of the topics that's been brought up this last year for people of many members of the BIPOC community has been, well, what happens when patients say something that is belittling or stereotypical or even outright racist to you, and how do you handle that? Is that a rare event or is that occurring pretty commonly? And this was a survey published in JAMA in 2020 of looking at 200 some internal medicine residents and what was their experience. And they broke them up into 3 groups, Latinx and Black they put together, Asian they put in one group, and then white they put in the 3rd group. And as you see here, just looking at demeaning or belittling stereotypes, it was happening commonly for both the Latinx and Black and the Asian communities, over 80%. So that's happening like quite a bit, probably every week or maybe even every day on some services. So, that's something that probably should be asked about and talked about, as you are hosting your journal club or you're meeting with your residents. Ask them about that. Have they experienced that? What about medical students or nursing students or pharmacy students or others who are on their rotations? Have they experienced that as well? Questioning their role, expertise, explicit epithets or refusal of care is less common. But here we see a troubling spike also in sexual harassment as well. So it really is about what we call the learning environment, right? And I'm a former clerkship director and spent a lot of time thinking about students and medical students. And that can really make it hostile if that's what you're experiencing day by day. So, looking at one more piece from that same article, they asked the residents, what is keeping you from responding to that biased patient behavior? And, of course, the most significant is the most response and none is the least here. But really, so many of our trainees are just so dedicated to patient care, right? They care so much about their patients that they'll do it anyways, even if they get called something really belittling in the course of that ER visit or a primary care visit. But I guarantee you it's going to stick with them afterwards. And are you the attending or the resident or the chief that's going to process it with them or say nothing in that moment? I think that can make a difference. That's this piece, feeling unsupported by the team, the senior physician, and if you're another profession, might be the senior pharmacist or the senior, the charge nurse or whoever. Are they kind of helping you along with that? Do they see something and say something? It's not a huge amount of people saying it, but certainly some experience of that. And then there's a bit of a training gap here, knowledge of skills about how to properly respond. I've yet to meet the residents that want to sign up for more online classes, right? So they get so many, and I know it's like the evening for all of you that are attending tonight, so thank you for doing that. But many of them are not quite, confident on what they should do, and this might fall into the category of what we call bystander training, which I'll mention in a moment, so most of us are frozen, you're just there trying to sit in the subway or buy something at a checkout line, and you don't expect to be accosted by somebody with a remark. And same if you're there just to hang an IV bag, or you're there to just to chat with someone, get your H&P done at 6:30, and you don't expect this epithet to be given to you, and then how do you respond in that moment? So and like all events, whether they're rare or common that have impact, I think we have to practice our response. Usually most of us are not super great on the fly. And then if this feeling of being emotionally overwhelmed, this was done, more than a year ago in terms of the actual survey, but I suspect that percentage is higher now, right? Because of COVID, everything that's happened, it just lowers our defenses when we see these things. So, maybe one thing to take away is consider reading this article with your residents or your med students or your trainees and see if they have any thoughts. So, another piece as we're looking to chart the path is looking at outcomes and really trying to be explicit about them. And, at the time, this is an article of 2002 from that event, raising awareness was really all we thought of doing, frankly. And I was not familiar with the deeper ideas of systems change. And I wish I was, but were I to go back 20 years, I would have placed raising awareness with structural changes. And I would have spent a lot of my effort not just on vigils, and I think, by the way, that they're very valuable. I have no knock on candlelight vigils and those types of events, but sometimes they're even more powerful if they're paired with policy, paired with other structural elements that will outlast the crisis of the moment. So how can we think about that? So again, this is your webinar from a little more than a month ago, where you had some of your senior leaders come together and some of your early career faculty to talk about, what's happening. And I applaud that. I think that's fantastic. And doing so in March too, which was, right in the midst of some of the most high profile events that have been occurring. And I did not see a recording of the event, but I did see the slides. And I thought there were really some outstanding ideas that were generated. And I hope that some of those carry forward. I'm going to highlight a couple that I saw. So during that seminar, there was a poll everywhere poll, and about 200 people responded about some things to do in the next 2 weeks, and now it's probably about 8 weeks later, right? So, I used to run faculty development, so I know you go to something and you get fired up, but then what happens after that is that as soon as you get back to your office or you go home, you get clobbered by all the things that have been waiting for that last hour, or if you had the misfortune of going to a conference that whole day or the half day that you were off, so to speak. And so then it gets buried under everything, right? So, but I just want to highlight again that there's some really good ideas that came out of that piece. Learning more about Asian American history and racism. Hopefully today's program is just one step forward on that same trajectory. Outward disapproval, as I mentioned in the Journal Club early idea, maybe that could be an idea coupled with some sort of a bystander training, right, about what we might do about it in our residency program here at UT Southwestern. And then checking in on friends from the community as well. And this is really important. And as I'll mention a little bit later as well, of course, there's a terrible humanitarian crisis occurring in India right now. And, I'm trying to check in with my friends. I was talking to Dr. Nesbitt, Dr. Wiles about that and before we began, just to talk with them and see who's affected. And there are very few people that are unaffected by it that have relatives back home in India. And so, it is intensely distracting. And we actually had a forum today for our Indian colleagues at UNMC where, several research leaders mentioned that their graduate students were often afraid to ask for time off, even though they were flat exhausted because they've been calling all night or all morning, just checking in on loved ones, trying to secure oxygen, all these different things. And it'd all be invisible if you're just there for rounds or just there to run your lab, if you didn't ask, right? And so we have to ask. And, what we did there was we had our senior vice chancellor for academic affairs send a letter to all the graduate faculty to say, hey, you need a little grace, for your students now, make sure you give them some flexibility. Do not demand that they come in to do research. Ask them what's on their plate, so, and there's some other ideas here, fundraising and self-care and so on. So a really great thing. In case you are interested, there actually is a free bystander training. I went to one last week just to test it out. And, I thought it was helpful. It's actually, some of it's about gender bias, some of it's about, just general, if you see something, what do you do? And they had this kind of 5 Ds mnemonic about what you could do about it. So I recommend that, that you consider this. It's about an hour, but it's a useful hour, and it might be more fun, not more fun maybe, but more useful if you attend as a group. Maybe it's your group of residents, your group of medical students, student senators. It might be a group of a leadership team for a department or for a unit, but attending together will help you to know, because what they try to ask you to do is think about what's your superpower among these, which one are you good at? So if you see something, do you create a distraction? Do you just walk in between the harasser and the person? Are you some of the delegates, a bystander, say, hey, can you call the police? I'm going to record this on my cell phone with this document. And they give you some tips, like say the date and time if you are recording something, and tell the person, that you are recording this for them and that you'll share it with them afterwards if they would like. And it's up to them what they want to do with it, the victim. Delay, try to get some ways to, interrupt kind of what's happening, and then kind of direct others to kind of help. So really, there's is actually the direct confrontation where you step up and say, stop doing this thing. So not all of us are comfortable doing that piece, but there's a number of other options. I do encourage you, it's a good hour, and they have these going several times a week. You can just go on this website and sign up for one. I also came across this 10-step recommendation in terms of action items, outcomes from the National APA Medical Students Association. And, a number of them we've already mentioned a little bit earlier. I'll just point out a couple that, as we are all being intentional about our anti-racism curricula, their recommendation is to be explicit about including the model minority myth, and also the bamboo ceiling, which is a so-called glass ceiling for people of the AAPI community about rising up to senior leadership roles. And then a couple items here that I mentioned a little bit earlier about naming, really making sure that Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders are not just invisibly part of the group. So think about that piece. And then as you're looking at your demographics, because you can only change what you measure, right? And we measure what matters. Are you lumping, or can you split out some of the actual underrepresented in medicine groups? And can you broaden your definition to think about that? So that'd be a conversation with your deans, and your leaders of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, and this is they have actually an online petition in that group that leaders can sign, and institutions can sign as well. So, back to infrastructure, the failure I had 20 years ago is we had a big event that lasted a week, but there was nothing after that, right? And so we went on with our lives. But the great thing is that you already have 2 existing areas of infrastructure that can carry the ball forward. So one is your Asian Pacific Islander Business Resource Group, which is centrally supported and open to any UT Southwestern employee. And they are active. And I think they were featured in the March 30th forum, at least some of the leadership were. And so if you're interested, you can follow this link and try to get involved. And hopefully some of them are on today. The other is this medical student group that I mentioned earlier, and UT Southwestern's been a longstanding member. So, really that could be another area where you reach out and either offer to be a mentor or help to facilitate some of that discussion about needs. So, there's an excellent article here written by the current leadership of the University of Michigan group, the Untitled Chapter. And this was their kind of a letter they published in Stat News for academic leaders about what they would like to hear from the student side of things. And they really said, look at that list, which I just mentioned, the top 10 items from actionable steps. Include us, right? And don't be silent as you see this wave of anti-Asian hate. Say something, and then talk to students and residents and include them in the anti-racism work you're doing, and help them to really be part of the conversation. So, and here I just want to point out infrastructure is also who is on your leadership team. And I just saw this from the March 30th event, but you have some senior leaders, including your dean, Dr. Andrew Lee, who is obviously of the AAPI community. And so, do they have some wisdom, some action items that they've identified? I see Dr. Yuna's active here in the chat as well, saying hello. And I've met her at the group on faculty affairs. She's an outstanding leader in her own right, and I think helped organize that March 30th event. But in case you couldn't catch that event or thought that you wanted to take a deeper dive, perhaps you can invite some of these leaders to come to your team meeting and share a little bit more. What are some additional things that you could do, or just a listening session together. One thing that when I led faculty development that we really worked on, and I'm currently interested in executive coaching and some of those pieces, is thinking about sponsorship, right? And it's often said in gender equity work that women are over-mentored and under-sponsored, right? So mentors are someone that has done something, can show you the way, but a sponsor is a senior leader that can really pull you up and literally create that opportunity for you, right? And so, for those senior leaders who are listening, and I consider Dr. Wiles and Dr. Nesbitt among them, are you mentoring a pipeline that's diverse, right? Who's on the table, who's around the table when you are sharing your pearls as you're thinking about succession planning? And from an institutional level, there's something called a 9-box where you evaluate, your department or your college or your health center, and you look at the skills and the stage of development of your leadership team. And does your pipeline have a diverse group of talent, including some AAPI leaders as well, as you're looking at that group? And so, integration as well. There's some outstanding group work going on, the faculty diversity and development, student diversity and inclusion. So I think that AAPI efforts should not stand alone. They should be integrated into what's already happening as part of that work. And it's all relational. I saw this on Twitter the other day. Dr. Quinn Capers, who again I'm inviting as a keynoter for our conference next year, is talking to one of your associate deans, and clearly there's a great relationship between them, and it's all relational is what I've learned in healthcare. Just for us to get any work done, it's about working across units, building friendships, helping each other in times of crisis. In my campus, we had unfortunately a physician suicide just recently. So I was involved with another department really trying to help out. And we became a lot closer in the process, and unfortunately, when terrible things happen, sometimes it can pull us closer together, I guess, as a silver lining. So, I want to call out Dr. Nesbitt for, I read this article that she's got this outstanding course looking at working in underserved communities. I was just talking with her before this presentation, and it's still going on. And I think that is an outstanding way to teach in real time, in vivo, right? The principles we're talking about for inclusion. So I love this course. I think that every medical center should have courses like this. And the more diverse the communities they're visiting, the more that in real time you're meeting with people who might represent a refugee population, right? And they might talk to you about genocide or trauma or other areas that you might not have understood or maybe had read a little bit about, but here you get it right from a first person perspective. I'll end with just these thoughts going ahead, which is, for us to be, I think, ethical as leaders, we have to be accountable, we have to anchor change, and we have to be aware. And I really like this letter from your president, Daniel Podolsky, and he wrote, in March 18th, to stand in solidarity with the Asian community. And I just want to highlight here in the second paragraph, this is a stark reminder that we have much work to do, and that's the ownership piece. That's the accountability that we all have to have during our tenure, which might be short or long on the leadership team. And I really like, this is one of my favorite quotes from Rosalind Carter. A leader takes people where they want to go. A great leader takes people where they don't necessarily want to go, but ought to be. And let me tell you that it's often uncomfortable work to truly work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? It means looking at ourselves in the mirror, realizing we all have implicit bias, we all have areas of growth, and we have to kind of double down on our humility sometimes to say, I got that wrong. I have to apologize for what I said at that meeting. I was not my best self, and I'm here to learn, and so we all make those mistakes, but it's the next day, how do we pivot, learn from them? And I think that's the lesson. In terms of accountability, one clue is go beyond your campus. This year, with the events that have happened, I've pulled together in my community a group of interdisciplinary leaders who, one is a former FBI director, and one is a journalist, one is an attorney for nonprofits, one is a head of a global center for Asian studies. The idea is that each of us is different, but we learn from each other. And I've learned a lot of things, even the discussion about AAPI being the wrong term, that came out of a debate that we had in this group. And it keeps you accountable because, we often live in these echo chambers, even in academic health centers. And so going to your community to see who are some of the leaders and what do they have to say, and then who do they represent? What are some voices we have missing around the table? Super helpful. Something I didn't know in 2002 that I definitely know now is to read John Cotter's Leading Change book. And the hardest step in that is anchoring change in the culture. And I'll say that where I've failed as a leader, it's been when I was passionate about something, but I didn't pass it along in the succession planning and it got lost, right? So, after my time, after Dr. Nesbitt's time, after Dr. Weil's time, will the next leader in that role have the same passion for what you're building? And have you really anchored it such that it'll last? That's the hardest test of any inclusion initiative. And I think that's what we have to challenge our leaders to do, because it has to be part of how we do business. This is why it needs to be integrated into the DEI work. So, and aware just means that, you have a broad group around the table. Many Indian American colleagues I talked to in the last couple of weeks have said how frustrating it's been that many of their colleagues don't know how dire the situation is in India, right? So, and you'll know it just by asking them. So again, just being aware so you're not caught in the dark when some crisis is happening. So just in summary, think about your community. You're having a tremendous community. You are equity leaders nationally, seen as a best practice, I think. And, but recognize that, there's still ways that you can improve, that we can improve, and it might be in disaggregating Asian American to separate out what's happening with our Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander or Pasifika and Southeast Asian communities. Are they served well by the current programs or not? Look at your two shining examples. You have the BRG and the medical student chapter. Should there be another branch, for residents or others? Think about that. What are some other needs? Who's not being served right now? And then think about those 3 A's: being accountable, anchoring change to last beyond your tenure, and just being aware of things by having a broad table. So I'll end on this quote. One of my more profound reads the last 5 years was this book by Ibram X. Kendi on how to be an anti-racist. And what I really resonated with was this quote about, what if instead of a feelings advocacy, we had an outcome advocacy that put equitable outcomes before our guilt and anguish? What if we focused our human and fiscal resources on changing power and policy to actually make society, not just our feelings, better? And I think that's really the initiative, and that's the challenge going ahead. So with that, I'll end and really appreciate this opportunity. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Liu. I am sure that our audience is so enlightened. I know that I have been. If we have any questions in the chat box, I would love to pose those questions to Dr. Liu in our last few minutes of our conversation here. Greta, do we have any already in the queue?
There are none in the queue. Dr. Yin did want to thank you, Dr. Liu, and she did put that in the chat. So she said she met you a long time ago. So
great. I have a question for you, Howard.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the education along the lines of Executive Order 9066 and the Chinese Exclusion Act in World War II, not really being very well taught in schools, and I will bear witness to that. But those are not the only pieces of history that are basically left out of our form of education in secondary schools. And what role do you think that the lack of history education in our high schools really plays in propagating racism in America today? Because it seems to me there's so many misconceptions about what other people in the world, and even people who are in America, how they've contributed to what America has become. What do you think that is as far as how we can propagate or fight the racist trends that we see?
Yeah, that's such a profound question, Dr. Nesbitt. And I'll just say that, I look at it from a couple of lenses. One is just as a parent right now, as I see my kids progressing and I see some of the gaps about what they're learning. And then also as a former workforce director as well. And I would say that, as an avid Twitter user, I often see that a question posted, which is, when did you first have a teacher that looked like you? And I see all sorts of answers, but typically for people of color, the answer is sometimes never, sometimes in college, sometimes in graduate school, sometimes on faculty or still waiting. And I think that is an unfortunate thing. As I mentioned, being aware, being around the table means that we need to have a plan for having a diverse workforce in K-12 education. As a child psychiatrist, I used to help organize a state education summit on mental health through our center. So I worked with a lot of our educational senior leaders in the state level. But I do think that what's missing are a couple of things, some national best practice curricula that are disseminated. And then as Illinois is trying to do maybe just a bit of a mandate to say, hey, you got to tell some of these stories. What I learned as a history major in college was that, history is not this set thing. It's not this cold, finished business. It's an active, intellectual process where you look at primary sources and you interpret them. And that's where I'd love to see more of that, whether it's about anti-racism, about slavery, about why there's not been reparations yet. All these questions are active questions now that should be asked and should be framed. And I think there's sometimes this tendency to want to shelter our kids, K-12, kids, that they can't handle some of these conversations. But I actually believe quite the opposite. I believe that, kids can handle it. Sometimes the parents have to help a little bit, but, we can really create some of these forums for these discussions. I think that's really the way to change the future if we can do so. So I think it's a really powerful question. I think that, history is, it has to be inclusive. It has to be part of the workforce teaching history, and that we can help perhaps by illuminating some curricula, some resources that can be used across different states, different communities. So great question.
Thank you. We've got a couple questions, and I will take license and say we'll answer both of these questions in the last couple of minutes. Maybe we'll go past a couple. Dr. Wiles asked, what are the mental health issues we should look out for in our students related to racial hatred?
I think it's a great question, Dr. Wiles, who I know is an expert in student health as well as a psychiatrist. I think that there's a difference in us between a diagnosable mental health condition, right, and stress. And so I don't want to pathologize an angry or sad or a tearful response to a terrible thing that was said by a patient or by a colleague that was racist as, being depression or something like that. But I do want to say that we have to take it deadly serious that the learning environment has so much to do with the health of our workforce. So I would say that, we talk a lot about curricula, but every day the hidden curriculum is really what students are seeing from us. And if they see that we are just doing, kind of check boxes on things to say we've done them versus when the stakes are down and then we see an uncomfortable interaction that we are equipping or not equipping, our future physicians and pharmacists and nurses to respond in the moment, that's what they'll see. I've seen other couple interesting pieces, right? So we worry about the mental health and the burnout of the workforce with COVID-19. So I think they're particularly vulnerable right now, Dr. Wiles, as I'm sure you're seeing as well. So I think we have to be proactive. Part of my job in our university is also to be part of the group that calls what we perceive to be high-risk groups from COVID. And we usually just say, hey, ICU nurse 1 or, physician 2 in the ED, just checking in. Are you doing okay? Most of the times they get shut down. They're like, we don't want to talk to you. So I do wonder whether we can do more integration. I have heard from some chairs of some consult services where they've embedded psychiatrists on rounding teams. And I think that, the daily interaction, you're more likely around the coffee table after rounds to say, you know what, that thing really bothered me, what I saw in that trauma bay there. It really bothered me. And I just, versus then having to reach out to a stranger. So my thought is if we can do a little bit more integration on teams, that probably is a wise thing to do.
Love that answer. We have one last question. It's a bit of a long read. There's an argument that the current focus on AAPI violence is as a result of the increase in coverage in the media, not necessarily that there is more AAPI violence. Don't understand that that rationale, but is there a historical context that explains this perspective that this is only about the media?
It's a great question. And I would say that the modern media, of course, is different than it was in the past, right? So a lot of times, if you've been to some of those early displays about the Japanese internment camps, for example, that I saw in New Orleans, you'll see a lot of black and white photos, but there was no social media stream, right? There was no Twitter. There was no hashtag organizing the response. And so a lot of those things were mementos that were saved and then only shown afterwards, long after the event had occurred. And so I would say that, the media piece is exploding now, right? It's a lot more horizontal than it used to be. And it's powerful, as we saw in the George Floyd case, where somebody with a cell phone can change the course of a case, which can change US history, right? So, I would say that Media certainly has a powerful role. I don't believe that media is driving all of the violence, I guess. I don't believe that it's just, kind of a false sense of different anger that's coming out. And you'll see that too in other measures. I think I showed you that earlier piece about violence attacks against Muslim Americans. And so you saw there's a peak in 2002, which is when we had the Hate Crime Symposium. There's another peak. The reason there was an article was there's another peak in 2016. And so, there's different unfortunate, complex, cyclical natures to violence, and often it has to do with increase in xenophobia or increase in racism or rhetoric around that. So I believe that it's legitimate, but it really is something where we have to just look at it over time. But I think it's real.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Liu, for spending the hour with us and for preparing a very enlightening talk that I think will help all of us to understand this topic better and at least set us on a pathway to be more prepared to handle it. I don't think we're done with our work yet. So I think you and I are going to have a lot of work, and Dr. Wiles and Dr. Yin and others and Dr. Capers are all in for a lot of work here, but it's good trouble, as someone said, not recently, a famous person. And I think this is going to help us. The talk will be available online. It will be posted on YouTube, and our IR folks will be helping us with that. With that, I'd like to close our evening. I thank all of you for attending this lecture this evening. Our anti-racism series has been one that has included a total of 8 lectures over the course of this year, and it's been my honor and pleasure to host them. We are looking forward to new plans for the coming year and how we might continue to have conversations that are helpful to improve our campus and our community at large. And good evening to all of you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.